Hello and welcome to another episode of All Politics is Local. I'm your host, John Tian. All Politics is Local is a production of the Greater Blackstone Valley Democrats. For more information about the Greater Blackstone Valley Dems, feel free to visit our website at www.gbvdems.org. We've got another great episode for you planned tonight. Happy to be back in the studio. It's been a several-month hiatus since I've been here. With me again is a repeat guest, Jim Miller of Interpreter Magazine. Jim, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me on, John.
We're here to talk about all politics being local. We're going to be all over the map. Local or not, we're going to be everywhere tonight.
Absolutely.
So, we have a real lot to talk about, mainly here in the United States. We're going to get into a little bit later the presidential politics, probably spend about 45 minutes worth of the show on that. But let's talk a little bit about the wide world out there, which is really your beat at Interpreter Mag. And I understand that you have a new gig as well.
Yes,
tell
absolutely.
Us about that.
So I just started to write for Reuters Opinion, which is great. And my first piece there, my team and I wrote a 6,000-word comprehensive report on the shooting down of Malaysian Airlines MH17 over eastern Ukraine.
Okay, that happened last year, right?
That happened 1 year ago, July 17th.
Okay.
Since then, a lot of evidence has emerged, and a lot of theories have been put forth by the Ukrainian government, by our own government, by now several independent investigations, and of course by the Russian government. And what this report really aimed to do was bring it all together, and let's look at the whole body of evidence that's available right now. The official report is out in October, and what was remarkable to me, and this is what I talked about in the Reuters piece, was overwhelming evidence that a surface-to-air missile provided by the Russian government fired and hit this civilian airliner and killed 298 people. And so it's really sort of the perfect example of how Russia is engaged in just really deceptive, terrible, destructive behavior in Ukraine. And of course, that's also symbolic for their behavior elsewhere. And that's the main purpose of the Interpreter magazine, is to talk about Russia, their internal domestic politics, but of course also their foreign policy.
Okay. And if anybody wanted to go and read your stuff, they could go to interpretermag.com.
You could go to interpretermag.com and find my work there. You can also find me on Twitter at MillerMina. And or Google. I'm sure it works.
Okay, and what about the Reuters piece? Would that be at Interpreter Mag, or would that be on Reuters' website as well?
Oh, you can find it if you just search for James Miller Russia or James Miller Ukraine, James Miller MH17, and you'll find it.
Okay, terrific.
It'll be there.
Terrific. Congratulations on the new job. That's great writing for Reuters Opinion. That's awesome. Good for you. So where are we in the Ukraine? And last time we were here, we talked about Nemtsov a little bit. What's going on with all that investigation? The burning question for me is, did Putin manage to find the real killer?
Putin, much like O.J. Simpson, has not found the real killer. We've been talking about sort of Russia. There was an assassination of opposition leader Boris Nemtsov in February,
right?
December. They all bleed together. The months bleed together. I apologize.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been a lot of investigation. Right outside the Kremlin, he was shot on a bridge with the Kremlin in the background. So sort of this horrific crime. This would be like being shot on Pennsylvania Avenue, and so the question was, how much was the Russian government involved? Sort of what factions within the Russian government were involved, because it's complicated. Mm-hmm. It's a complicated mix of motives and players, and we don't know. And I guess what's frustrating is that it's hard to believe that a crime like this would go unsolved. And so, of course, they arrested two guys, and they have connections to the Chechen government, and the Chechen government is basically a puppet government of the Russian government. And one of the men right after the assassination managed. He was trying to fly back and couldn't get a flight because they were all booked up. So managed to get a flight on a Russian government airline that you can only get if you have governmental connections.
Okay.
So of course the question is, was Putin directly involved, or what were the motives behind this?
Right.
And look, here's what we do know. What we do know is that the Russian government has shut down independent newspapers. It's arrested journalists. The foreign policy advisor for the organization that funds us was a young guy in his 30s. He was poisoned and hospitalized in a coma for weeks, and he was poisoned right after a meeting in a government office. So it's just really awful. They've passed laws effectively banning, cracking down on NGOs, non-government organizations that have operated, some of them in Russia, for decades. And so there's sort of just this total crackdown on their domestic opposition in Russia. And then simultaneously you see them doing things like invading Ukraine, like ramping up their intervention in Georgia. You have on the 4th of July, if you were lucky enough to be on a boat a few miles off of the West Coast in San Francisco or in Alaska, you could have looked up and saw Russian strategic nuclear bombers that were buzzing our airspace.
Really?
Indeed. And so, from time to time, basically there are very set rules in international airspace. It's international airspace, so everybody sort of flies there. But generally speaking, you don't do something like set a course directly towards somebody else's airspace at high speed, so that when they look at their radar, they know that you're just flying through international airspace. You're not launching an attack.
Right, but if it seems like you're launching an attack, then you want to say, what's going on?
Well,
here?
right, and that's and this is so. What happens is that periodically miscommunications happen between lots of different countries, and we wind up escorting, or somebody else winds up escorting, planes from another nationality. But what's happened is that these incidents have increased like 20 or 30 times in just a year and a half, involving Russian aircraft and Russian sea craft in international airspace and international sea space in just a year and a half.
Wow.
So you have very aggressive Russia. They're redeploying nuclear weapons to an area of Russia called Kaliningrad, which is actually surrounded by a whole bunch of other all NATO countries. They've just announced that they are going to be positioning nuclear bombers in Crimea, which is a peninsula of Ukraine that
was contested heavily, and
So just a year and a half ago, it was Ukrainian,
right?
And Russia basically seized it illegally, and claimed that it was a local uprising. And then, of course, 6 months later, they were like, no, those were our troops, but it was important that we do it.
Right.
And then simultaneously, you see these, no, those are local troops popping up in eastern Ukraine, and Russia still denies it's them, which is what our next report will be. We're looking into not just whether or not the Russian military is involved in eastern Ukraine, because frankly, it's a settled question. There's so much information. Journalists have seen, tanks cross the border.
Right.
The OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation of Europe, which is an organization Russia belongs to, has their monitors, and they only have 450 in Ukraine. Their monitors alone have seen 20,000 troops cross the Russia-Ukraine border in less than a year, between September 1st and June 1st. And what's interesting about that is September 5th of last year was when, hypothetically, this conflict should have been over, because Russia negotiated what's called the Minsk Protocol, which should have been the ultimate ceasefire that ended this conflict. And of course, we know it wasn't.
It wasn't.
So 20,000 troops since Minsk, basically.
Wow. So it's almost like the Kremlinology is still going on from back in the dark days of the Soviet Union. we had the Kremlinologists who studied what is going
Yeah.
on, and yeah, so it's back, and it's back in spades, it would seem.
It's back, and and when we talk about, we're going to talk about a lot about U.S. domestic politics in a little bit.
Yep.
And my frustration with U.S. domestic politics is it's so much about ideology. I think this, I think that. And with the foreign policy, when I started with this magazine over 2 years ago, we were just focused on the facts. Just what are the facts? What is Russia doing? What is Russia saying, and what is it doing? And, we were raising alarm bells. Look at all these horrible things that Russia is doing, and they're saying horrible things, and they're doing horrible things, and there's a pattern to it, and we should be worried. And people, accused us of being ideologues,
Or
being
alarmists,
Russophobes
or
or alarmists.
Yeah.
And of course, we were right. We were right about what was going to happen in Ukraine. We were right about Crimea. We were right that Russia was going to intervene in eastern Ukraine. We predicted that was getting out of hand. And then the next day, the day after I published an article in Foreign Policy magazine about how Russia was directly involved in the conflict, the civilian airliner was shot down.
Wow.
And then 2 weeks later, I published an article in the Daily Beast predicting that there would be an invasion in eastern Ukraine, and 2 weeks later, the Ukrainian government declared that there was an invasion of eastern Ukraine. So there are patterns. We should be concerned about them, and facts are scary at the moment when it comes to Russia.
And here's Russia armed with how many thousands of nuclear weapons?
They have the largest nuclear arsenal in the world. It's bigger than ours.
Yeah. And here we are trying to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons with the Iran deal, and it looks like it's facing some stiff opposition from the ideologues on the right in our own country. And so it seems like they're focused more on this small little thing that's going on in Iran, when we should probably be focusing on a larger picture of what's happening in Russia.
I could accuse both sides of focusing on small topic when it comes to Iran or the Middle East. Syria is, of course, a major conflict that Russia and Iran are very much engaged in. And, just today, General Dempsey, the most senior, I think he's the most senior commander we have now, he told Congress that the two greatest threats facing the United States were Iran and ISIS, the terrorist group. Of course, he says ISIL, which I could get into at length and give you a boring conversation about Arabic, but it's ISIS, and sort of for reasons that I think are purely political, the Obama administration has decided to go with the L because it removes Syria from the equation.
From the equation, right. They want to make it appear like maybe a little less serious.
Yeah. And it actually stands for Al-Sham, which is actually Greater Syria.
Okay.
So that includes, actually sort of contradictory, it actually includes parts of Iraq.
Okay.
But it also includes Palestine.
Okay. What about, does it also include parts of Turkey? I know Turkey is pretty upset.
It does indeed.
Yeah.
It does indeed, yeah. And the Levant is actually a different word altogether in Arabic. But it's very similar to Sham. It's almost like, I can't think of a single analogy, so I'm not going to spend any time.
Okay.
But they're, anyway.
So what is your opinion on the Iran deal? Where do you stand on that one? I personally, myself, I'm pretty happy that perhaps we've halted the spread of nuclear weapons in that region, or at least delayed them for 10 or 15 years, rather than seeing it happen tomorrow.
A good friend of mine, David Petrokarakos, wrote a book called Nuclear Iran, and he studied. He's the only one, to my knowledge, who talked to the opposition in Iran. He talked to Iranians who were living abroad. He also talked to the regime. He interviewed the people who were responsible for the nuclear program in Iran. And what is amazing is that pretty much everybody he talked to who was Iranian want at least a civilian nuclear program. Okay, most of the opposition only wants a civilian nuclear program. They don't want a nuclear weapon. They think it's bad for their standing in the world. It puts them into an adversarial position with the rest of the world that they're trying to stay out of. Mm-hmm. But everybody wants this deal. So you're faced, the reality is that no one in Iran opposes this deal, even the people who hate the regime. And I spent 2 years studying writing nothing about, solely, I should say, on the Iranian opposition, the pro-democratic, moderate opposition. And they also want the nuclear deal. So David's sort of thesis is like, look, there has to be a nuclear deal. But the rest of his thesis is, the Iranian government is really evil. Like, they are engaged in really terrible things.
Right.
They basically, so much of what happened in Iraq, and when I say this, I'm not trying to take responsibility away from the United States here, because I think if we hadn't removed Saddam Hussein, all of the problems or many of the problems,
a lot of the problems
wouldn't have happened.
Right.
But,
or at least the Baathists. Had we left Baathists in power and allowed them to run the country, we might have prevented some of this ISIL group from forming.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, look, there are two bad things about Iraq. One of them was the idea to invade, period. But then the other one was the awful management of the war.
Right. And the post-war reconstruction. And you can get away with a terrible mistake if you just execute it well. Maybe.
Right. But, it was both a terrible mistake and executed very, 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 very poorly.
Right.
You could debate, for instance, Afghanistan, whether that was a mistake or not. But it was clearly also executed poorly, and it was executed more poorly over the course of time because so much focus was on Iraq.
Because so much focus was placed on Iraq.
But inside of that, that's sort of our domestic framing of it, which I think is right, and it's also a lot of the world's framing of it. But inside of that, Iran was fueling a lot of these Shia militias that killed soldiers, that killed way more civilians than soldiers.
Right.
My boss, Michael Weiss, has written what a lot of critics have called the definitive book about ISIS, the start of ISIS, the spread of ISIS, and the book focuses very heavily on the fact that Iran and Assad in Syria have allowed ISIS to get this far.
Yep.
And they've used it to their advantage. I'm friends with a reporter who would, from The Guardian, who would prefer to remain nameless, but he talked about being in Aleppo in Syria and seeing ISIS headquarters, and there were all the buildings were standing. They didn't have any craters or anything, and you'd walk 250 yards in any direction,
and it was a mess.
And it was like a ruins.
Yeah.
Assad and Iran have manipulated the situation with ISIS, and we're ignoring that. And this is what Dempsey said today: is that regardless of the nuclear issue, we are ignoring these other pieces. So to me, I think there are problems with the nuclear deal. I think it's the best deal that we could get. I think that it's very important that we got a deal. I think that the hyperventilation on the right is, in many regards, misplaced, because I think a big part of our problem with Iran is also their terrible handling of our relationship with Iran.
Mm-hmm. You look at, back to 1953. We deposed the Iranian democratically elected government, put the Shah back in power.
Absolutely.
And for the next 25 years, he tortured his people.
Absolutely.
That was a terrible thing that we did. You wonder why Iranians chant death to America. I think if we looked at it and said, if Iran had done that to us in 1953, we'd be chanting death to Iran right now. Never mind that probably a lot of people are somewhere in Arkansas or Alabama or wherever they get together and chant.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Well, and that's a great point too when we talk about radicalism. The American media and certain politicians like Mr. Mike Huckabee they, look, there are, the average age in Iran is like 18, 19,
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
Most of these people were born long after the end of the Iran-Iraq War. So all of all of these major political issues that we talk about regarding that sort of set the United States and Iran against each other, they're born after all that. They
Right.
just don't care.
Right.
They do care in the sense that it still affects their
Their daily lives.
but they don't
Yeah.
have sort of the visceral reaction that somebody who's much older
Would have.
will have.
Yeah.
But these clerics, okay, who, by the way, the clerics control a lot of the hardline media.
Right.
They're all old white beard folk,
yeah.
okay? And they're the ones who were saying the craziest stuff about Israel, about the United States. And you have then ideologues in the United States who amplify that message. And what's interesting is that if you read Iranian newspapers, the crazy statements by some of our craziest politicians,
Yep.
or the burning of the Quran by some fringe guy with a YouTube video, they make the newspapers in Iran.
Right.
So they're sort of this sort of feeding off of the crazy
Yeah,
in
and
both
just
of these
escalating.
countries,
Yeah.
and escalating and escalating and escalating,
Yeah.
and it's permanently damaging our status in the world. It's really getting in the way of accomplishing things. But I think, and General Dempsey's point today is that this is not over. This is the start of a deal. We still have an inspection
There's
regime,
a long way to go.
and
Yep.
we still have military options on the
Oh, yeah.
table if they fail.
Absolutely.
And but we need to make sure that the ideologues on both sides. A lot of people have been rooting for this deal, especially on the left, and I am very concerned that the attitude will be, oh, well, Iran's done, let's move on to the next topic. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, if Iran develops a nuclear weapon, Iran is not done.
Right.
And I would
Right.
like to handle these situations before we get that far.
Right. So speaking of the crazy feeding on the crazy, we've spent too much time already on Iran. I really want to get into domestic politics. Let's talk a little bit about the GOP primary and where things are going. Matt, if we could pull up one of my graphics, let's pull up the GOP polling graphic, please, and let's leave that up for a minute so that Jim and I can talk a little bit about the shape of the GOP and where we're heading. I've only got 15 of the candidates on here. By last count, I think there was at least 16 or maybe even 18, depending on who you ask, candidates that are running for the GOP presidential nomination. But here are the top 15, all the way from Trump at 18% down to Lindsey Graham at 0.2%. So they've all done some pretty crazy stuff, but Trump is right up there with the crazy. He is going off the deep end, right and left. I don't know, speaking of Trump and Graham, I don't know if you saw the thing about Lindsey Graham's cell phone.
Oh, yes.
Apparently Trump decided to give out Lindsey Graham's cell phone number. To Graham's credit, his response was pitch perfect. I mean, just pitch perfect.
Yeah.
On Twitter, he said, I guess I need a new phone, Android or iPhone.
Yep.
And then he proceeded to release a YouTube video of himself smashing flip phones, which he's famous for using a flip phone. And he smashed flip phones, about 6 or 8 of them, I think, in various ways. So pitch perfect on that. But let's talk a little bit about Donald Trump and what he represents and what's going on the right side of the political spectrum here in this country and what he represents in presidential politics.
Anger, frustration, hate,
Division.
a division. Sort of. There is this sense in the Republican Party, and there has been for some time, that that first of all, complicated issues can be boiled down to a bumper sticker.
Right, the soundbite. People say, why does the right dominate Twitter? And I always say it's because anything with more than 140 characters has too much nuance.
Yeah,
So.
well, and certainly in our political discourse, that is accurate.
Yeah.
I think if you were to sit, Lindsey Graham and John McCain in a room and have a conversation with them, I think you would notice that there's a way more nuance even within the Republican Party, which is not particularly known for nuance.
Right.
But so there's this sense that if you're just angry enough and strong enough, and that's what people respect, and if you're unforgiving and unrelenting and unwilling to compromise, you're gonna get stuff done.
Right.
And we've seen candidates like this before. I saw Howard Dean speak in maybe 2003.
2003 was his heyday.
And at the University of Maryland, and and it was very early on in the campaign season, and he gave an incredible speech. He identified all of the things that Democrats, or I should say Bush's detractors, were angry at.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened was, as the election got closer, people realized that, first of all, a lot of the other candidates began to get angrier and express some of Howard Dean's
some of that same
views.
frustration, yeah.
And also, no one had any idea what Howard Dean was actually going to do. We knew what he was angry about, and that resonated. And of course, voters didn't vote for him because he didn't have a platform. Trump doesn't have a platform.
Yeah, Trump has been out there saying a lot of things, though. Let's bring up Matt. If we could bring up Trump 001 .jpg. That's my first Trumpism. The quote here is, I believe he just said he is not a war hero, referring to McCain. So that's why in brackets it's McCain is not a war hero. He's a war hero because he was captured. I like people that weren't captured. Okay, I hate to tell you. Now, that whole sentiment flies in the face of logic. McCain is a war hero and is widely considered a war hero because of his captivity. Because as the son of an admiral, he chose to stay when he could have been released. He chose to stay and endured 5 more years of torture at the hands of the North Vietnamese back during that really horrible conflict and that really horrible period of this country's history. So, arguably, you could say that had he not been captured, he certainly wouldn't have been considered a war hero. He was a poor pilot. He splashed 5 planes. Were he not the son of an admiral, he'd have washed out. Trump's comment there just belies his whole worldview. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He says things just to say them.
Just to say them, and and look, I mean, McCain's response to it was really admirable, frankly. He didn't take it personally. Mm-hmm. He mentioned, I'm in this theater, and
politics ain't beanbagging. Yeah,
that's right. But we have a lot of people who are war prisoners or who have fought and served in wars. And God bless them. But they don't deserve to be demeaned by a man who wants to be the commander in chief.
Right. And I wonder how many deferments Donald Trump had during the Vietnam War.
Oh yeah.
I'm not certain, but I believe it was more than one.
Oh yeah.
So
no, there was more than one.
He had several deferments during that period. Let's bring up another comment from Trump. Trump 002, please, Matt, if you don't mind. So when Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. I think he meant with them, but perhaps us and them gets kind of confused in his mind at times. They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists. So Trump there just lumping all Mexicans into this rapists category.
Yeah, and what's remarkable is even the last little bit of that comment that wasn't on there was he said, and I believe
I assume some of them are good people. Yeah.
So you can't even take it out of context because basically he's saying most are not good people. They're rapists, and look. First of all, there's so much wrong with this. It's sort of the whole construction of it is crazy. As like a former English major, I'm like, first of all, Mexico is not sending us people.
Right.
Surely that is not the way it works. It's not like the Mexican president wakes up today and says,
10,000 more.
Send,
over the border.
here's the list of people I would like to send to the United States. Most immigrants, whether they're, frankly, whether they're good people or bad people, whether they're doing it legally or illegally, come to the United States for the same reason.
For a better life.
For a better life.
For themselves and their children.
And Mexico is terrible right now.
Right.
They've gone through a lot of problems, and by the way, a lot of those problems really are our fault. We being the United States, has really fueled the drug war by being a massive market for drugs,
Right.
and by having these sort of militant policies, which have not helped out. We've sort of rewarded those who cooperate with us militarily to confront the drug problem. We've rewarded, but really a lot of those people are actually just fueling the problem. We haven't rewarded, for instance, people who are less corrupt.
Right.
We've sort of rewarded regimes that just sort of keep the problems down there.
It's kind of the enemy of my enemies is my friend type of thing. Or
That's right.
He may be a bastard, but he's our bastard.
Yeah, and so there's that part of it. The next part of it is, frankly, if you know anything about crime, if you were really a hardcore criminal, you wouldn't leave Mexico. It's Disneyland.
Yeah.
But then the rapist part is really remarkable, because the idea that any one group of people is statistically significantly more rapist than another group,
right.
is just pure racism.
Well,
I mean,
let's on that note, let's bring up Trump 003. Matt, if you don't mind, please bring up Trump 003 for us. So I have a great relationship with the Mexican people. I have many legal immigrants working with me, and many of them come from Mexico. They love me. I love them. And I'll tell you something. If I get the nomination, I'll win the Latino vote. Trump is delusional.
yeah, no, it's nuts.
Yeah.
But I mean, just like, also, who makes a statement like, I have a great relationship with the Mexican people?
Right.
Like, with all of them?
Right. Well,
like
some of my best friends
tens
are
of millions
Mexicans,
of-
right? I mean, isn't that essentially what that statement
Well,
says?
right.
I mean,
This is the you're at a dinner party and I have a black friend, but I totally have problems with. It's the if you have to say you're not a racist, we were saying this before.
Right.
If you have to say you're not a racist,
chances are
you're
you've got a
racist.
race problem there. Yeah.
And you've seen pushback. This has actually hurt Trump's brand, which, by the way, Trump is an awful business person. So a lot of people don't realize he was born rich.
Right.
Born
rich, declared bankruptcy how many times?
4 times.
4 times.
He's not a self-made man.
Right.
Bankruptcy laws, which I could spend a whole lot of time on, exclusively punish the poor and reward the rich, because they give the rich the ability to sort of gamble,
Right. Gamble and hit the reset
with their
button.
money
Yep.
without using their money. And then just hit the reset button, which is what you've seen. How can Donald Trump, successful businessman and billionaire,
Right.
have declared bankruptcy 4 times?
4
He's
times.
been rich those whole times.
I have a picture on my Facebook feed. Donald Trump wants to do for America what he's done in the business world. And then the bottom half has another picture of Donald Trump. It says Donald Trump has declared bankruptcy 4 times.
Yeah,
So there we have it, folks.
And I mean, so like this also goes to another sort of mythology in the Republican Party that you see, which is that rich people or business owners know about the economy. Now, I'm a human being, and inside here are organs. That does not make me a doctor.
Right.
I don't know how this works. I've just got it.
Yeah, I know my kidneys process some stuff, my liver processes others.
Vague understanding, and I have a better than vague understanding. I could explain it to a 10-year-old, but I couldn't explain it to a surgeon.
Right.
Donald Trump is not he's not an economist.
Right.
These guys understand how to make themselves rich.
Right.
It's
Well, my favorite thing on the right is tax cuts. It is always the mantra: tax cuts. We need a tax cut. Rand Paul went somewhere, Baltimore, after the Baltimore riots. Rand Paul said, "You know what would help Baltimore? Tax cuts.
yeah.
Tax cuts. Tax cuts. Magical. They do everything.
People who don't have any money.
Tax cuts do not create jobs. They
No.
just plain don't. You know what creates jobs? Consumer demand.
Absolutely.
When consumers have money to spend, that creates jobs. A $15 minimum wage, that would create jobs. Millions of them.
And I mean, look, like, so that statement, right? Tax cuts don't create jobs. Consumer demand creates jobs.
Yep.
Is not an opinion.
Right.
It is demonstrably fact.
Demonstrably true.
Now, you can look at, you know, if you want to talk about nuance, which this is the point. We can't talk about nuance. Who are we talking to?
Right.
Where you know, the debate of should we raise taxes or cut taxes, that's ridiculous. That's like, should I cut a kidney out or not? Well, I don't know. That depends, man. And
Do you have an extra?
And there's a lot of questions that need to be asked there, like, you know, why are we cutting taxes, and which taxes are we cutting?
Right.
If we're raising taxes, which taxes are we raising, and what are we doing with the spending?
Yeah.
You know.
But that's the whole thing. We need that nuance. So getting back to Trump, if we could bring up Trump 004.
Who is, speaking of nuance.
Speaking of nuance.
Right.
Trump 004, please, Matt. And there we have his great relationship with the Mexican people has caused one entrepreneurial Mexican to come up with the Trump piñata.
Which
I wanted to show the two side by side. It is a remarkable likeness, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, and so, you know, what's been interesting is that, you know, Trump is unelectable in the general election. And anybody who agrees with Trump is unelectable in the general election. Right. You know, forget about winning the Latino vote. You have, so the first thing you saw was major Latino companies pulling the plug.
Right. Univision, goodbye.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But what's been interesting, and this is increasingly not just about this issue, not just about Trump, is you're seeing companies, major, you know, white corporations primarily, like Apple or like Walmart, put their foot down on some of these statements, on some of these policies that are coming out of the far right, and they're saying no. And it's about immigration. It's about, you know, certain aspects of the gay rights issues. It's about certain aspects of other policies as well. You're seeing these companies say no. You're seeing companies stand up to Scott Walker and say, we're going to have to pull our business out of your state if these policies go through.
Right.
So, you know, you have companies now who are making these sort of political decisions. And these are companies that are traditionally apolitical. These aren't your super lefty or your super righty parties. You know, Walmart put its foot down on some of the gay marriage stuff. Walmart's considered pretty conservative.
Yeah,
but, you know,
and they also did they pulled the Confederate flag immediately before eBay did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is a great point. You know, the Confederate flag is another, man, that didn't even make our agenda. We've got a lot on the agenda.
Yeah.
You know, the Republicans are the ones who are responsible for taking down the Confederate flag. It's not, there's no Democratic coalition.
Well, and they should be. They're the ones who are responsible for putting it up.
Well,
so, back in '61, certainly in South Carolina.
Okay, yeah. Right, yeah. I was going to say, if you go back far enough,
yeah,
I guess
true.
I guess it was
But back in 1961 in South Carolina, that's what happened there.
Which, you know, I didn't realize that. You know, I don't know. I'm 1961 is a long time ago for me.
Yep.
But you know, I did not realize that flag was put in South Carolina just in protest of the civil rights movement.
Exactly.
It's sort of remarkable. So it's not like this has been there since the 18th. But I guess my point is, you're seeing companies that are saying, wait, you know, let's take a step back. These ideas are bad for business. They're bad for our employees.
Yep.
You know, we have black employees.
Yeah.
We have gay employees.
We have
Latino employees. Yeah. We have gay, black, Latino, Muslim customers.
Yeah.
And the rhetoric is just too much.
It's poison.
We're just going too far on some of these things. And I hope, that gives me hope. The rhetoric, the Trump does not give me hope. Those poll numbers don't give me hope. But some of this other pushback that's coming on Trump from some companies that are saying, we're just not going to do business.
Right.
And it's not just NBC.
Right, and exactly. It's everybody. So one of my favorite quotes of all time, Mark Twain has some dynamite quotes throughout his literary career. One of my favorite quotes from him, though, in fact, I have it as a signature line somewhere on one of my blogs. Irreverence is the soul of liberty, and often its only true defense. So if we could pull up my last image of Donald Trump, and this will be the last thing that we talk about on Trump 005, please, Matt. Have you heard of Trump Your Cat?
I have not.
Trump Your Cat is the most awesome website. Any cat owner knows that you should brush your cat periodically, because cats, when they clean themselves, tend to get too much fur and they'll cough up hairballs. So if you brush your cat, you can get a lot of that loose fur out, and the cat's less prone to hairballs. So Trump Your Cat says that this is a great opportunity for you to do two things that'll be wonderful. Number one, brush your cat, because he or she probably needs to be brushed. And number two, you take the resulting fur from that brushing and shape it into a toupee and make your cat look like Donald Trump.
I love it.
The image that we just had up there was a lovely representation of a Trump Your Cat. They've got a hashtag going, and when Trump goes out and says things, I think mockery is the best response to him. He deserves to be mocked mercilessly. Polling came out today. If it were Bernie Sanders against Donald Trump, Bernie's winning 58-38 at this point. And I saw polling a while ago, too, from the Electoral College perspective. If it were Hillary against Donald Trump, Donald would take 3 states. Hillary would take 47. So that's Lyndon Johnson versus Barry Goldwater numbers right there. So I sincerely hope that Trump continues to talk and continues to lead in the polls. If we could bring up the polling graphic again, please, Matt. In this graphic, it shows that Trump is at 18% to Jeb Bush's 14%. Speaking of Jeb Bush, I think that we should all start calling him by his actual name. His name is not Jeb. His name is John. I'm proud of my name, and I think that he should be equally proud of his name. His name is John Edward Bush. His initials are Jeb, and that's why he's the good old boy, Jeb. But at the end of the day, the Bush family hails from Connecticut. I hail from Connecticut. He should call himself John.
So maybe you're a
That's
Bush.
his name.
Is that
maybe.
what you're saying?
It could be that I'm a war profiteer who dealt with Nazis. No, maybe not. So, in any case, let's move on from Donald Trump. Trump Your Cat being my irreverence for the night. Mike Huckabee, we touched on him briefly earlier when we were talking about the Iran deal. Matt, if we could bring up Huckabee 001, please. There we go. The Iran nuclear agreement would take the Israelis and basically march them to the door of the oven. There are reprehensible comments made in the world, and then there's that. That is just ridiculously over the top.
It is ridiculously over the top. It's scaremongering on just a ridiculous level. If there was no nuclear deal, Iran would not change what they're doing. If there's no nuclear deal, Iran could be developing a nuclear weapon
right now.
Israel is more than capable of defending itself. We, as the United States, certainly don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Having actually dealt with professionals in the foreign policy circle, having actual contacts in the Pentagon, etc., I can tell you that they are looking at this very closely. This is a major priority for the United States military, for the CIA, for the Pentagon. The idea that we are, think significantly less safe because of this deal is preposterous. The language is just unacceptable. Yeah. And it was a Godwin's law of the internet.
Yeah, of the internet.
Is that any conversation about any topic will eventually degrade to the point where
someone makes a Nazi comparison, or
sorry,
somebody brings
someone
up
is
the
Hitler.
Nazis. Yeah, someone is Hitler.
Yeah.
There was only one person in history who was Hitler, and I think his name was Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, and this is a point too. Does it have to be as bad as Hitler before we get worried about it?
Right.
No.
Right.
So can we drop the Hitler?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
The Nazis were horrible. They were abhorrent. They did some really, really, really terrible stuff, and it wasn't only Jews.
Yeah.
They went after developmentally disabled people, mentally disabled people. hundreds of thousands of them sterilized or put to death.
Mm-hmm.
Gay men put to death in droves. Gypsies. They attempted to wipe out the Roma gypsies. They went after all manner of people and put hundreds of thousands of them to death in addition to the millions of Jews that they killed. The repercussions from the Holocaust are felt today. There are certain small communities of Jewish people, for instance, who can't find organs to be donated because there's so few of them. There's just not enough tissue type that matches, and it's a direct result of the Shoah, the Holocaust. For any politician in the United States to begin a comparison of anything we're doing today to Nazism it really frosts me. It really does. The same thing with slavery. You see the slavery comparisons. Ben Carson said about Obamacare that it was worse than slavery. The worst thing since slavery or something like that.
It's ridiculous. And this is the point too, right? Is that the insinuation is that Obama is marching the Israelis to the door of the oven.
To the door of the oven, yeah.
It's so deeply offensive. And I was having a conversation with a very Republican senior foreign policy advisor and commentator, and he was talking about how just completely distasteful the language that is being used about our sitting president. And it's from far more respectable places than we're used to seeing it.
Right.
And maybe there are certainly other examples of this in the past, and we shouldn't make it a Republican and a Democrat thing. But I think this president has been particularly vulnerable to it. The insinuation that he's not born in this country, that he's a Muslim.
The otherness of him is what it amounts to.
The otherness of him, and sort of the groundlessness of the hate and the conspiracy theories,
right? Just
so over the top and so divisive.
Yeah, I told you earlier when we were talking before the taping began about the bumper sticker that I saw on the way in here tonight that said, "I'm not a racist. I don't like Obama's white half either."
Yeah.
Which again goes back to if you have to say, "I'm not a racist," chances are you've got a problem with race. You see people doing things like this. The otherness of Obama, that's the whole thing with the birth certificate.
Yeah.
While on the other side of the coin, you have Ted Cruz running. He was born in Calgary, Canada. Everybody admits that. He has Canadian citizenship. Everybody admits that.
Yeah.
And yet there's no problem with him running, and there's no demands for his birth certificate, et cetera.
That's right.
Yeah, it's just really ludicrous. Matt, if we could bring up the polling numbers again, I just wanted to run down those real quick before we take our last few minutes to actually talk a little bit about the Democratic campaign. So there we have Trump at 18%, Jeb coming in at 14%. I'm sorry, John coming in at 14%. Scott Walker at 10.6. So at this point now we have to get down into the decimal places. Marco Rubio, surprising me that he came in fourth place at 6.2%. He's trying to make a little splash in the polls today. We'll talk about him in a second. Rand Paul still at 6%. There's Ted Cruz, our Canadian, at 6%. Huckabee. Huckabee's at 5.6% in this polling aggregate, but I believe after that reprehensible crack about the ovens, he's actually risen a little bit in the polls.
Huckabee has jumped up in the polls. So there might be more data on this.
And then we have Ben Carson at 5.2%. Ben Carson is a fine neurosurgeon. I'm sure of that, with him having performed some really revolutionary surgery, separating conjoined twins that were joined in their brain stems, stuff like that he's done. A fine neurosurgeon. He knows nothing of politics and shouldn't be running. Chris Christie and Rick Perry, Kasich and Santorum, they're all on the bubble for the first debate on August 6th. So it'll be interesting to see what they do over the next couple of weeks in order to try and get themselves to improve their polling numbers so that they can make the cut and get into that first debate. Somebody on Daily Kos the other day was making fun of Kasich's campaign logo, comparing it to bacon, because apparently it looks like a slice of bacon. Rick Santorum basically agrees with Huckabee, so I think he's trying to ride that coattail. Then you have Bobby Jindal, Carly Fiorina, and Lindsey Graham rounding out the poll. Lindsey Graham should really give up at this point. I think he's just not getting any traction So
Yeah, I mean, so okay, so part of this problem is, and we could go through that list and sort of divide it between like legitimate politician and crazy person.
Yep.
And there's some people who are a little bit of both. I think Ted Cruz is mostly crazy, a little politician. I think Rubio is mostly politician, a little crazy.
yeah,
But you know,
Lindsey Graham mostly politician.
Lindsey Graham mostly politician.
Yeah, Carly Fiorina, I don't know what she is. I don't know if she's
No idea.
Yeah,
She's calling it like
she's a poor CEO.
yeah.
All right, she did a terrible job at HP. She's not a politician. You remember the Demon Sheep ad that they put on the air? Oh my God, what was that?
Yeah.
I don't understand what she's doing in the race.
Yeah. So I guess like here's the issue, right? Is that if you're on that list and you're not Trump, what do you do? 'Cause
Right.
Trump, I mean, Trump knows what he's going to do. Trump is just going to be Trump.
He's going to continue to be outrageous.
And what Huckabee just found is that if you can out crazy Trump,
Right.
you
That
can gain.
You can
gain the swing
Yep.
craziness.
Speaking of which, let's bring up Rubio 001. Rubio made a little splash today with this tweet. Look at all this outrage over a dead lion. But where is all the outrage over the Planned Parenthood dead babies? Well, yes, a lion was lured out of a protected area in order to be shot by a big game hunter, and a lot of people are rightly angry about that. The dentist, the American dentist who did that, Walter Palmer, he has closed his practice. He hasn't shuttered it forever, but his practice is closed today. And there's a makeshift memorial to Cecil the lion being built at the door of his practice, wherever it is that he practices dentistry. And I think that the outrage on that is justified. As far as Planned Parenthood and dead babies are concerned, I believe that women have the right to bodily autonomy. My daughter, were she a perfect tissue match for me and I needed a kidney, I could not compel her to give me a kidney because she has control over her own body. No more should a fetus be able to compel her to carry it to term. She should be able to make her own decisions. And I find all this stuff about Planned Parenthood, especially these videos that have just come out, this is orchestrated in order to distract from everything else that's going on by the right.
Well, I mean, look, the right could easily settle the Planned Parenthood issue because the right has had many, many opportunities to effectively reproduce an organization similar to Planned Parenthood that does not perform abortions. They could do
Right.
that now.
Right.
They could do that now. And by
the
the way, it could pass. You could convince I think you could convince certain Democrats to vote for that organization because then it would effectively close the debate about whether or not the United States government is sanctioning or funding, subsidizing is the word I was looking for, abortion.
Abortion, right.
But the Republicans are not about to put forward an alternative to any of these policies.
Right, because that would involve things like contraceptive assistance. It would involve things like age-appropriate sex education.
I'm more cynical.
These are things that prevent abortion, but they would never go for them.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm also more cynical. The Republicans don't want to close the debate about abortion.
Right. They'd rather keep that open.
They would rather keep that
and
open.
they now have gay marriage, or not. I shouldn't call it gay marriage. They now have marriage equality.
Well,
which that's going to be their new.
So what's interesting about marriage equality, though, is that the polls are changing so rapidly in favor of marriage equality. And if you look at countries that have passed marriage equality, like Ireland, whereas initially it was controversial, and then it was controversial, but there was a majority that wanted it. Now it's not controversial. So the polls are swinging in that direction pretty much in every country in the world except for like Russia, parts of the Middle East. So in my curiosity is, can you win the general election if you oppose marriage equality? I don't think you can. But can you win the Republican primary if you don't oppose it? I don't think you can.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do think, I know these issues are equated a lot by the media, by politicians, the issue of abortion and the issue of gay rights, but I see them as very, very different. Because, you know what, if you are, if you do believe that a fetus is a human being, it's a crime that's being committed. If you don't, well, then this is this is a theocratic debate or whatever. But the two are really completely separate issues. And you are right that there's other issues sort of lumped in here, like contraception or things like that.
Family planning assistance, women's health.
Sure.
Planned Parenthood provides mammograms and pap smears and other vital services for women's health.
All of that could be all of that could be addressed by the GOP, but the GOP doesn't want to address those issues. So that's on them. And by the way, when we get to talk about facts, okay, we had George Bush put forward these the faith-based initiatives and the sort of organizations funded by the United States could not, give out contraception or whatever.
Right.
They had abstinence-only education. Well, we know abstinence-only education does not work.
Right.
But also the opposite, we also know. We know that where there are contraceptives available, does not increase sexual activity.
Right.
So it's a red herring. It's a distraction. It's a dishonest debate, and I think that there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah. So we have just about used up all of our time. We probably have about 2 minutes left. I did not get to the Democratic side of the aisle at all. Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders appear to be taking up all the oxygen in the room on that side.
Look, I think there will be plenty of time to debate the Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. I think that they're actually a lot closer on a lot of issues than people give them credit for. I think if you look at the question of which of their policies would actually pass a House and a Senate bill and be adopted by the become a law, I think that they're actually a lot closer. But the reality is that the Republican conversation is just a sideshow.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it's the Republican clown car, and there's 15 or 16 of them piling out of the car.
Yep, and there will be I think there will be a more serious debate about Hillary Clinton versus Bernie Sanders versus some of these other candidates who don't stand a chance. But it's going to have to wait a bit.
Yep. So I think that signal tells me that we're just about out of time. I think we have about 30 seconds left. Jim, thank you so much for coming in tonight. Really appreciate you being here. It's wonderful to have you as a repeat guest. We'll have you on again, and we'll talk more about Clinton Sanders next time and about Black Lives Matter. I wanted to touch Black Lives Matter, and we didn't even get to that at all. But thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, John.
And congratulations on the new gig with Reuters. I hope everything goes well. So
Thank you.
You've been watching All Politics is Local. All Politics is Local is a production of the Greater Blackstone Valley Democrats. For more information about the Greater Blackstone Valley Dems, feel free to visit our website at www.gbvdems.org. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, everybody.